Good morning, or is it afternoon? Well, I don't know. Anyway, here we are. Today I just wanted to go back to another person I worked with in Houston, Texas. It was the clinical something.
Clinical psychology.
Clinical Psychology Center in Houston. And it was owned by a psychologist, I would say. And he owned, well, let me explain for the location. He had a 3-story brick office building, the first building in a big medical center, just south of downtown Houston. And if you came through Houston on Main Street and kept going, you get just to the outskirts of Houston. It's all one big city, you know. It goes into a center. Well, it's a big medical center that had a lot of different buildings in there for different things. All to do with medicine and that, naturally. Well, what my job was I was a maintenance man or handyman for the 3-story building and his house. Well, his house was about another building between it and before you quite got there. There was quite a little area there of big apartment buildings and big houses and stuff, maybe a block or two. And he had a 3 or 4-story house, I forget which one, but it had an elevator in it even. So it was a big fancy house. You don't hear much about people putting elevators in houses.
Yeah.
But he evidently was pretty well to do because he owned another big medical building. Well, not only that, but I'll tell you a little later on, he owned a big ranch in somewhere around in West Texas. When I went out there with him, it was in an airplane, so I couldn't tell you exactly where it's at.
Huh.
He had his own airplane. Well, I guess a bunch of other stuff, but anyway, getting back to his house, first thing I had to fix was the elevator, something electrical.
Right.
And then he, in his backyard there, he had this big house. He had a big dog pen, and he had about 3, 4 big dogs back there that I had to feed and take care of. But luckily, I got along pretty good with dogs.
That's good.
Especially when they found out I was the one that fed them. You know,
Yeah.
oh, dogs are smart. So it was quite an interesting job because, well, now for example, he wanted me and my wife to go to the grocery store with a big grocery with a list of some groceries he wanted, a bag or two. I forget how much it came, how volume-wise it was, but
Right.
he gave me a car to drive. He didn't give the car to me, but he gave me the keys to one of his little cars out there. And it wasn't very new, but it ran to start with. So we went to the grocery store and did all his shopping, and he had gave me check to give him, to fill out to give him. He signed it and everything, but all for except the amount of the groceries.
Right.
But they wouldn't take his check.
Huh.
So I had to phone him and tell him they wouldn't take his check. And of course, I don't know what the situation was at all.
Right.
But he sent somebody with something and phoned him, and he got it all straightened out. And it seems like I had more trouble with that car on other errands too.
Huh.
So, anyway, that's the type of work we did, you know. My wife was a maid and a cook. Or they had a cook, but she helped around the house.
Right.
Cleaning and things. And I helped around the house when I didn't have it, when I wasn't feeding the dogs, working on something that needed fixed. So, and this place was, his house was right across the street, going east, across the street, because the main street of Houston runs north and south. Was a big park, a nice big grassy area, and they had a big, I don't know what you'd call it, a big stage with a half a dome, you know.
Yeah.
You probably saw where the orchestra sits under the half a dome and then plays music for people in the park. Well, then beyond that was the zoo. Of course, they had a big zoo, a lot of stuff in it. It was really interesting, and you know, just we really enjoyed walking around in there. And then they had a train. I forget what it ran on, whether it was a bonfire, I mean a wooden fire, coal, electric. It might have been electric or something. But it was a toy train, and where the cars was just big enough and wide enough for seats, you know, for kids or adults. And it went around that whole grassy area. The whole layout was pretty nice, you know. And of course we spent a lot of time over there with all the different animals they had and everything. So I just trying to tell you the kind of layout where we was at and the situation. So things went along good, and I got a lot of stuff working in his house that wasn't. And the elevator was one thing I had to get working right. And I guess he must have had a lot of money, that's all I can say. But anyway, things was all straightened out there pretty good. And I kind of had a headache one day, and he said, well, come on down to the office and I'll check you out. So I went down to his office, and he checked me out and said, well, you're in pretty good health. I don't know what the headache was, and I told him, well, I get real tired every once in a while. And he said, well, come on back here in my office. And he said, I've got just all kinds of pills here and different kinds of stuff. Meaning pot, marijuana, the whole works. And he says, I don't know if you're used to any of these, but if you want anything there that you want, or that will that might help you out so you can work good.
Right.
He was worried about me being able to work good. I don't know why. Well, he hired me. That's why he was making sure I could work good. So I told him, oh, well, I feel just fine, and I don't need anything. And I left. When I got out of there in a hurry. So he said, well, you've got things going good here. I've got a job for you and your wife that I really need a couple for, and it's going to be for all summer. This was just early in the spring. He says, I have a house up in the mountains, and he says where, in West Texas there somewhere, and I need a couple there to live, just to take care of the house and make things, everything's all right, kept up and kept in good condition. And well, that's, sure, I like that, because I really like the house in the mountains and stuff.
Right.
And so he said, well, then I'll have my chauffeur drive you down to the airport, and he'll get my plane ready, and I'll just fly you up there. And so just be ready in the morning about 8 o'clock, and we'll go. So the next morning we got in this airplane. That was a nice airplane, pretty big one, and it was really comfortable. So we went up there, and it turned out that he had an airport up in the mountains. It's in a valley. In fact, he had a big ranch. And man, he had cattle and horses, and you talk a mansion up in the mountains. My goodness, that ranch had a real wonderful house. It was a big house, and then they had another house there just for the housekeepers and stuff. Anyway, but what he had done is dammed up a mountain creek. So it was located at the far end of this valley, and he had put a dam there, so he had a lake. It was a pretty big lake, not real wide, maybe 100 or 2 feet wide.
Right.
And long, going along where the road is. You had to go across a bridge to get to his place. And this lake went clear around and to where it's the beginning of the valley where the creek came down, the water.
Right.
And it was a pretty big lake, small, but big enough. And his house was on the other side of it from the highway. There was a paved highway went through there. It wasn't no main highway at all. It was just a paved highway. And if my memory was good, I could have told you what the name of the town was. I can almost remember, but I can't quite.
Right.
On both ends and stuff like that. But and then on the other side of the lake, of course, was their house, and it was in a big fenced-in enclosure, well, a big yard in it, and everything, but it had a big high fence around it, and he had a mansion in there. I mean, it was, you could call it a mansion, where he lived. And then a little farther down, there was, a big warehouse-type metal building, long, big, and I guess he raised horses, and I don't know what all the business he was in. They have the airport there, a landing strip, and the hangar or two. He had quite a layout, my goodness. He must be a drug smuggler or something, you know, to have all this up in the mountains, but I never did find out, because our little house that we lived in was on the other side of the lake, on the roadside.
Right.
And the only time we went over in their yard is, well, my wife did all the time, because she helped over there. And I was in there for a lot of fixing things. I fixed a few things up that needed it while I was there. And then I even got back in that other building, but I I didn't want to get curious enough to what kind of line of work he had going on there.
Right.
So after everything was ship-shape there, he gave us cars to drive, and then, well, he had a guy follow us to lead the way up into where his house was, and it was on farther into the mountains and up there in a little, well, it was beautiful country.
Right.
And he came to a house that you wouldn't think was up in the mountains. It looked like it was built out of rock and cement, and it was a 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom house. It was not a huge house, but it was just a good house that you would find in a nice section of the city.
Right.
You know, it had everything there. And the yard was nice, lawn and bushes around it, and of course then the forest all around there. And he said, okay, I just want you to take care of the house, and if anything needs fixed, make sure it's working good, and so forth. So I think we must have lived up there, must have been all summer.
Right.
3 or 4 months. That was a wonderful vacation, because we could get out and hike and even ride around in the cars, get acquainted with the neighbor and around. And it was, nobody lived for quite a large area around there. And of course we even saw a lot of wild animals. No need to go into that, because you know what you find when you go out in the
Right.
mountains that way. So we had a real good rest, and was able to hike around and just take care of the house, keep it like it was livable. And so we had that experience. And finally, it got the end of that summer, and they came up and got us, or phoned us and told us, okay, we could come down. And of course, we drew our checks, so we had a little money. But then, after staying back down there for another week or 2, he took us back to Houston, flew us back.
Right.
That was kind of a dream job, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I could handle 2 or 3 more like that. But, well, we enjoyed it, and we got back to town, and I looked around and in the papers, and I got another job with, let's see, he lived in Houston on the west side, where a lot of expensive houses were, in a neighborhood with a lot of expensive houses, and he just had a single-story house, but it was big and nice. And the house that we lived in was, a nice little small house that was on the other side of the big swimming pool in his backyard.
Right.
And between our house and the swimming pool, of course, was some big bushes and plants and stuff, so you couldn't even see our house from the other house. So we had nice living quarters, and my wife helped around the house, and I took care of the lawn. And he had a big circular drive, and one of these blowers to keep the leaves off the, all the necessary things to keep his yard up.
Right.
Lawnmowers and stuff. And it was really an easy job. And well, then the first entertainment type. He owned a big building. It was on the other side of Houston. It'd be the north side of Houston it wasn't downtown, but it was still in a shopping area, you know, in Houston. And it was a big house. Well, it was a big building that he owned, a business building or something. He owned it, and he was some kind of a lawyer or something. I don't know whether I ever knew what he did.
Huh.
But he was an executive type, wore a suit to work, and drove a new Cadillac, you know, or it might have been a European type car, and had a garage with 2 or 3 other cars. And the house was just a single floor, just
Right.
a 1-floor house, but it was a big house, spread out, and it was luxurious inside. And so he, part of his business, I think he must have been a psychologist or something, because he had people, he'd hold parties, and it seemed like these people that would come would be customers or special people that he was trying to make some big deal with.
Right.
And something like that. And lo and behold, I was the bartender. And I never did drink or anything either.
Right.
I didn't know enough about even what to mix up. But I could read labels. I had enough of his friends to tell me how to mix drinks that pretty good. I got to be a pretty good bartender. And no, I never sampled it. I wasn't that interested. Besides, I don't believe in drinking.
Right.
And, but it was a real interesting job, you know, to see how rich people live.
Right.
And just from listening to all the talk and everything, I knew that he had a lot of people that he knew and wanted to deal with and was dealing with, and other people that was dealing with other people. You know how people talk at parties like that. It was a get-together thing for customers and would-be customers and old friends and new friends. And so, and my wife's job, of course, was to work in the house to help the wife do the housework and stuff. But that job lasted, I don't know, we lived there for about a year, I think. And then it got springtime, and he said, well, I want you and your wife to go down on the beach and fix up our beach house. And we might not need it, but we want you to go down there, and it might take you 3 or 4 weeks, just however. And so we went down there, and boy, that was about a 3-story beach house. It was more like a townhouse.
Right.
It was really nice to live in, and it was just almost on the beach. It was just a wonderful place to live, really. And so we spent the summer there playing on the beach, and playing tennis, ping pong, and anything else we could find to do. What a job, huh? Because it wasn't hard. The house was clean to start with. But they wanted to make sure it was clean, and we never did hear from them for about a month. And finally, I guess he had some particularly good, or was going to have a party or something down there. So he came and got us and took us back to do work in their house again. But that all turned out. I've had a couple pretty good jobs, you know, like that.
Right.
And from that, let's see. Is there anything else happened of good interest now?
You might want to look at your list.
No, that's about all the different things, except we really had a ball at the zoo. We would go to the zoo a lot. We had, oh yeah, there came a hurricane through. And of course it didn't do no damage to the house or anything, but they had a big old oak tree. And man, that must have had a trunk this big around. And that hurricane, and it was huge. And that hurricane blew it down.
Huh.
Man, the roots all came up and everything on one side where it fell, you know.
Right.
And this is where I learned about trees' roots, between the difference between pine trees and oak trees. So of course that was quite a big job, because he had people come out though naturally, tree removal people.
Right.
And they cut it all up and hauled it off, and lo and behold, down the street. Well, this was days later after all the preparation work. Here comes a big truck with a huge oak tree on the back, on a big trailer rig, and they planted another oak tree in there.
Huh.
You'd have thought that, well, he didn't know anything about roots either, or maybe he'd have planted a pine tree. But, you know, you can learn a lot just from watching nature itself. So that was a big job. But he had a big front lawn too, which was no big problem, because, you know, with a big lawnmower, riding lawnmower, you just mowing lawns is a snap. That's really easy. And well, about that time, I'd heard from some people in Brown and Root that they was going to build another power plant somewhere. Oh no, it was a lime kiln. That's what they called it. Well, that's what they called it, but all it was after I got there, it was a paper mill.
Huh.
And I found out all about how they make paper. It's really interesting. They have acid, and then they use a lot of sawdust. And they mix sawdust with acid, and it makes a liquid. And then they have big rollers, metal rollers about this round and 20 feet wide. It's about at least 20 feet. And they had where that squirted it out on that roller. And these rollers are good and warm, you know. The first ones might even be a little hot. I don't know the temperature. But it was enough to where that spray would hit it, with it slowly moving, and then it would go from that one and another and another, and they had the line of rollers a half a mile long.
Huh.
Believe it or not. You could see there just as kind of in the clouds down there at the end of and at the end, of course, the paper was dry by then and rolled up on these big rollers, and of course they have the big trucks to haul it off, because then you got paper.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how they make paper. Well, what they wanted was another roller put in. And it was to be put in up to the beginning, because they figured they could arrange it some way to put another roller in.
Right.
So we had to, well, while we was, my brother was the general or the manager of the Brown and Root project to, you know, design the prints and all the instrumentation and stuff needed. And while they was doing that, I roamed around everywhere and saw how they made paper. And out in back now, they must have had 40 acres of huge pyramid type, only it wasn't flat-sided, big piles of sawdust. And they had these conveyor belts where you dump stuff in and then it goes up, little buckets going up to empty the railroad cars. They had a railroad place, they could bring a railroad car up. It was an open railroad car, like a coal car, you know. And it would go up in this little shed-like thing. It had a roof over it, and the thing would grab it on each hand and dump it, lift it up and dump it on another assembly line things that would, that they could move it to anywhere. That's why they had piles all over. They'd take a conveyor belts and run that sawdust out and make another pile. So that gives you some idea of how a paper mill is run. Now, one particular interesting little story, in doing this work, I guess they had to cut a hole down in the floor, cement floor in the hallway, right in where this is the beginning. And I noticed a sign there that said caution. They didn't have it roped off or anything. But caution, open hole. Well, one of, I don't know who it was, whether, I forget whether it was one of our guys or one of their guys, but he accidentally stepped in that hole and it was full of this acid type stuff that was mixed up.
Eek.
I never did find out if he was still alive or what, but that'd be very uncomfortable.
Yep.
He probably, they knew when he fell in, and there's a lot of people around there, so they probably saved him. So that's one thing that you have to watch out in some of these jobs. You have to be careful, especially in a paper mill where they got a hole in the floor. And then another interesting thing.
I got 2 minutes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Another interesting thing in this paper mill. Every minute was worth $1 million, I think they figured. So every 20 feet, all the way down that big line, was little red buildings. And they had a maintenance crew in each one of those buildings, so that if anything happened and they had to stop the production line, and a big old alarm would go off, scare you half to death. And all the doors would snap open and you'd see people jumping out and running, and otherwise time was worth money and they had to get
Right.
that thing running. But that was really, you know, when you instrument fitter work in stuff like that, you really see a lot of interesting things.
Right.
You sure do. It's just worth it. The job is worth it for the experiences you get and the countries you get to see and all that. Because Brown and Root is a big company. They're the ones that build all the houses and barracks when we had our war over in Europe or whatever the place was. I forget now. You know, with Germany and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So Brown and Root they built also oil platforms.
40 seconds.
And so the possibilities was really a person could be working all the time. Because the instrument people, they use instruments all over on all these jobs. But me and my brother was fortunate enough to pretty well stay in the line. They called that the lime something or other. That
10 seconds.
So, well, it's been nice talking to you again, and I hope to see you somewhere